The wind cut through the plains like a knife, sharp and unrelenting. I felt it bite my face the moment I stepped out of my cabin. The horizon stretched wide and empty, whitewashed in snow. Every gust carried the smell of frost and old pine, a scent that both calmed and warned. I rode alone, as always, my horse's hooves leaving prints in the frozen ground that seemed to vanish under the pale sunlight. It was the kind of quiet that pressed in from all sides, a silence that could make a man think too much, or nothing at all. I preferred the nothing. But then I heard it, a sound so faint it might have been the wind itself, except it carried a weight no gust could produce. A cry, high and brittle, almost like a bird in distress, yet unmistakably human. My horse whinnied softly, as if it too had caught the plea. I nudged her forward, boots settling into the stirrups, eyes scanning the low scrub and frozen grass. Through the bare, brittle mesquite, I found them. 2 little girls, no older than 6 or 7, huddled together against a stone outcrop. Their breaths formed clouds in the cold, tiny puffs of life in the frozen world. And a wolf, lean, grey, and hungry, stood just a few paces away, eyes glinting, hackles raised. I felt the familiar knot of fear and responsibility tighten in my chest. One shot, quick and precise, or risk the girls. I moved slowly, deliberate, rifle raised without a sound. The wolf's growl deepened, a low rumble that seemed to shake the air itself. I squeezed the trigger. The crack of the rifle echoed across the still plains, and the beast fell, its body shuddering as it exhaled its last. For a moment, no one moved. The girl's eyes were wide, dark pools of wonder and fear, darting between me and the fallen animal. I crouched, lowering myself to their level, careful not to frighten them further. My voice, when I spoke, was soft, carrying more reassurance than words. I offered my canteen. The older one hesitated, but eventually let her sister drink first, then took a long gulp herself. Their clothes were torn, smudged with dirt, their small frames thin beneath layers meant to protect from the cold. I shrugged off my coat and wrapped it around them, feeling the slight tremble of fear and exhaustion in their tiny bodies. They clung to it, to me, to something solid in the endless white. I led them toward my cabin, half a mile away, leaving footprints behind that marked a path I would follow again and again. By the time we reached the cabin, smoke curled faintly from the chimney. The girls stepped inside cautiously, eyes wide as they mapped the small, warm space. I fed them first, bread softened in broth, beans ladled into bowls. Outside, snow began to fall gently, turning the world quiet and white, and for the first time in days, the girls' laughter mingled with the crackle of the fire. And I realized, sitting there by the hearth, that the silence I had cherished for so long had shifted. It was no longer emptiness, but a space where life had returned, fragile, frightened, but alive. Before we go any further, tell me where in this wide, wild world you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments. I'd love to see how far this story can travel. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and damp wool, a small sanctuary against the endless white. The girls huddled close to the fire, their tiny hands stretched toward the warmth like birds seeking the sun. I watched them, noting the way fear still clung to their movements, how they flinched at every snap and pop from the hearth. It reminded me of myself once, younger, trusting no one, relying on no one. I gave them names in my mind before I even asked. Tolla, for the older one, sharp and guarded. Winona, the smaller, hesitant, cautious, yet curious in equal measure. I ladled warm broth into bowls, careful not to spill, and set the food before them. Tolla ate quickly, hungrily, as though the world had trained her to take what was offered without pause. Winona nibbled slowly, eyes flicking toward me between bites, reading me as if measuring the danger of this new place. Outside, the wind carried the soft fall of snow, covering our footprints, erasing our path back to the wide plains. I felt the weight of responsibility settle heavier on my shoulders. I had survived out here for years, alone. But these two, small, fragile, entirely dependent on me, changed the rules. I would protect them, as fiercely as the land itself demanded. I fetched blankets from the loft, wrapping them tight, then sat near the fire, boots stretched toward the heat, letting the warmth seep into my bones. The silence between us was different now, not empty but filled with fragile trust, the beginnings of a bond one had not thought possible in this frozen world. Snow continued to drift down, soft as whispers, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel entirely alone. Morning arrived grey and quiet, the snow still thick on the cabin roof. I stepped outside, rifle slung over my shoulder, scanning the plains that stretched endlessly, white and unbroken. The girls were behind me, their small boots crunching in the frost as they followed cautiously, bundled under the heavy coat I had wrapped around them. The wind carried no sound but the distant caw of a raven, black against the endless pale sky. I guided them to the nearby creek, its surface frozen in patches, reflecting the pale sun. They were hesitant, testing the ice with careful steps, and I stayed close, keeping my eyes on the horizon. The world felt dangerous, but strangely alive in that moment. Their laughter, quiet and shy at first, drifted across the frozen water, breaking the monotony of isolation that had clung to me for so long. Tolla's sharp eyes caught movement beyond the tree-line, and I followed her gaze. A shadow flickered, tall and thin, disappearing behind a grove of cedars. I nudged the girls back, instinct pulling my hand to my rifle, muscles tightening. This land offered no guarantees. Its peace was fragile, earned with vigilance. By the time we returned to the cabin, the girls were tired, their small hands red from the cold. I set them near the fire, blankets around their shoulders, watching them curl into themselves for warmth. I knew survival out here required more than food and shelter. It demanded trust, the fragile kind that takes time to build. And for the first time, I wondered if I could truly provide it, not just for them, but for the life I thought I had long abandoned. Outside, the wind shifted colder, carrying the faintest scent of smoke from somewhere down the plains, a reminder that civilization, with all its dangers and rules, was never far. The cold had settled into my bones by the time evening came, but the fire inside the cabin crackled like a promise, holding back the darkness outside. The girls were asleep, their small bodies curled beneath the blankets I had arranged for them. I sat in the chair closest to the hearth, hands resting on my knees, listening to the wind whip against the cabin walls. Silence had taken on a new weight tonight, not just emptiness, but anticipation. I thought of the shadow we had glimpsed near the tree-line earlier. It could have been anything, another traveler, a predator, or someone more dangerous, drawn to the same loneliness I had called home. Out here, you never took the plains for granted. Every sound, every movement was a possible warning. I checked my rifle again, running my fingers along its worn stock, memories of past hunts and confrontations flickering through my mind. Then, from the loft, a soft shuffle drew my attention. Winona had woken, eyes wide in the dim firelight, staring at me as if questioning whether the world outside was safe. I gestured for her to stay close, and she crawled down the stairs with silent, careful steps. I let her sit near my boots, hands pressed to the warmth of my legs. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Her presence alone said enough. Tolla shifted in her sleep, murmuring softly, and I realized how much I had begun to care for these fragile lives. They were not just survivors. They were reminders that even in a world this harsh, bonds could form, and something worth protecting could be found. Outside, the wind moaned around the cabin, and I knew tomorrow would demand vigilance. But tonight, for a brief span of hours, the cold could wait. The warmth of two small lives nestled against mine was enough to keep the darkness at bay. Dawn broke grey and brittle, the snow glinting faintly under the weak winter sun. I stepped outside, rifle in hand, scanning the horizon. Tracks, fresh and deep, cut across the frost, leading from the forest edge toward the cabin. Wolves, or maybe worse. My horse shifted beneath me, restless, sensing my tension. The girls were still inside, trusting me entirely, and that trust weighed heavier than any rifle or bullet. I guided them to the loft, making them sit behind a barricade of crates and furniture. Their eyes were wide, silent, following every movement, every shift of wind that rattled the cabin walls. I had fought many things in my life, men, beasts, cold, but the responsibility of their lives pressed more fiercely than any danger I'd faced before. A growl rolled across the frozen plains, low and deliberate. I saw shadows moving among the trees, shapes hunched and alert. My finger hovered on the trigger. Survival here meant not just fighting. It meant anticipating, calculating, and making the choices that would decide lives in a heartbeat. The first wolf leapt from cover, and I fired. The sound cracked across the clearing, echoing off the frost, sending others scattering. But more kept coming, drawn by the scent, drawn by the promise of weakness. I fought through the chaos, moving between the cabin door and the small barricade, protecting the girls, keeping them safe. Each shot carried the weight of their lives. Each breath I took a prayer whispered to the frozen sky. When the last shadow disappeared into the tree-line, the silence returned, tenser now, but relieved. I looked at the girls, saw the trembling hands, the wide eyes. They were alive because I had been there, because I hadn't faltered. And in that moment I understood something. This life I had chosen, solitary and harsh, could no longer exist for me alone. The storm passed, leaving the plains washed in silver light. The cabin smelled of burnt wood and pine smoke, but inside, the warmth had become more than just fire. It was life, fragile and growing. The girls were sitting near the hearth, Tolla sharpening a small knife she had found, Winona tracing patterns in the dust with tiny fingers. I watched them, the weight of responsibility pressing as sharply as ever, but something in their quiet resilience sparked a strange comfort. I moved around the cabin, checking supplies, mending a crack in the door, all the while feeling their eyes on me. Trust was not freely given, but they offered it in small, careful doses, and I accepted, knowing that to fail them now was unthinkable. I remembered the look in their faces when we had first met, fear mingled with hope, and I realized how much this frozen world had already changed me. By mid-afternoon, the wind had softened. I stepped outside to stretch my legs, watching the endless horizon. Tracks in the snow caught my attention, different from before, smaller, deliberate. Someone had passed nearby, leaving a path that led straight toward us, stopping short at the edge of the trees. My heart tightened, a mixture of caution and curiosity. Out here, strangers could be friend or foe, and every decision carried the weight of life or death. I returned inside, feeling their small hands brush against my legs as they followed me. There was no fear in their steps now, only cautious curiosity. And for the first time, I allowed myself to think beyond survival, to wonder if maybe, just maybe, this strange family we had begun forming could endure the harsh world outside these walls. Late morning brought a distant clatter, the sound of hooves crunching in snow, steady and deliberate. I stepped outside, rifle in hand, scanning the pale horizon. A lone figure emerged, riding a worn horse, cloak wrapped tightly against the wind. She moved with quiet confidence, unhurried but purposeful, eyes sharp even at a distance. My pulse quickened, not with fear, but with the weight of knowing this arrival could change everything. The girls had followed silently, peeking from the cabin doorway. Tolla's hand gripped Winona's sleeve, and I gestured for them to stay put. As the woman approached, I caught the faint scent of smoke and sage clinging to her cloak, and something familiar in her stance suggested a lifetime of survival, like me. When she dismounted, she knelt briefly in the snow, arms outstretched toward the girls. Their laughter erupted, cautious but joyous, and I felt a strange mix of relief and unease. She spoke little, but each gesture carried authority and care. I realized she was not merely a traveler, not merely a survivor. She was theirs. Their mother, perhaps, or someone who had claimed them in ways I never could. I remained apart, watching the reunion, understanding that my role had shifted. Protection was no longer just about survival. It was about belonging, about ensuring that even in this harsh, frozen land, the bonds we forged could hold against wind, snow, and the unforgiving plains. The world outside might be unyielding, but inside these walls, the shape of a new family was forming, fragile but undeniable. She stayed, not out of obligation, not as a visitor, but as a presence that shifted the balance of the cabin. The girls clung to her like sunlight in the cold, their small hands threading into hers as if drawing warmth directly from her being. I watched from the hearth, feeling the edges of my solitude blur, replaced by something unfamiliar, shared responsibility, and even, quietly, hope. Nia, her name, finally spoken aloud, moved with ease, tending the fire, fetching water, repairing what the winter had broken. Each gesture carried certainty, a skill forged from hardship, and I recognized the same survival instinct I had relied on all these years. Tolla shadowed her, quick and attentive, while Winona lingered near me, hesitant to step too close, yet unable to resist the warmth spilling into the room. Outside, the wind whispered over the frozen plains, a reminder that danger had not disappeared. Wolves, strangers, the endless threat of the cold. Life demanded vigilance. But inside, the cabin hummed with small routines. Water drawn, bread baked, chores shared. Survival had become a collective effort, each action tied to the safety of another, each breath taken with the knowledge that failure was no longer solitary. And in those quiet moments, I realized something. This was more than protection. It was trust. A bond forged not by blood alone, but by the shared insistence to endure, to carve warmth from frost, and to claim belonging in a world that had long offered only solitude. The wind had grown sharper by late afternoon, cutting across the plains with a relentless bite. I was outside, checking traps and scanning the horizon, when movement caught my eye. Two men on horseback, faces hidden beneath wide hats, eyes calculating. They slowed at the edge of the property, lingering like vultures drawn to weakness. I felt the familiar coil of tension tighten in my chest. Inside, Tolla and Winona sat close to Nia, who moved with quiet assurance, positioning herself between them and the door. My rifle rested nearby, fingers brushing the stock as I assessed the threat. These men weren't travelers seeking warmth or trade. They carried suspicion, greed, the kind that thrived on fear and judgment. The law of the plains, outside our small sanctuary, was harsh and unforgiving. I stepped into the cold, boots crunching in the snow, and met their eyes. No words passed. We understood each other instantly. One misstep could ignite violence, but hesitation could invite it. The girls peeked through the cabin window, faces pale but curious, and I knew that today's choices would define more than just survival. They would define whether this fragile family could exist in a world that refused to bend for it. The men circled, muttering, their horses pawing the frost, and I realized the truth I had long known. Protection was never just about firepower. It was about resolve, about showing that what we had built here, a home, a family, was not to be taken lightly. And if the plains demanded, I would make them understand. Snow swirled around us as the men dismounted, boots crunching hard against the frozen earth. I stepped forward, rifle steady, every muscle coiled, aware of the girls behind the cabin window, eyes wide with fear and trust. Nia was beside me, her presence calm but unyielding, a silent declaration that we were not to be trifled with. The men hesitated, sizing us up, muttering threats that carried little weight in the wind. I tightened my grip on the rifle, but it wasn't just the weapon that mattered. It was the resolve behind it. Tolla appeared at the doorway, small but fierce, fists clenched, her stance saying she would not be moved. Winona peeked from behind her, trembling but rooted, and I felt a strange surge of pride. This was our family, and we would defend it. A tense silence stretched, broken only by the distant howl of a wolf, a reminder of the wild we shared. One man stepped closer, questioning, testing, and I raised my voice, low and steady, warning them that this land, this cabin, and its occupants were not theirs to claim. The snow carried my words far and wide, crisp as the winter air itself. Slowly, grudgingly, they stepped back, realizing some boundaries could not be crossed without consequence. When their horses faded into the horizon, the tension didn't immediately leave. But inside, the cabin glowed with firelight, warmth that no wind could undo. We had survived, together. The bond between us, forged in frost, fear, and shared care, had become something stronger than any threat. And for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could endure anything the world dared throw at us. The storm had passed completely, leaving the plains quiet, washed in soft silver light. I stood outside the cabin, rifle leaning against the doorframe, watching Nia and the girls move through the snow, carrying water and gathering kindling. Their laughter drifted across the frozen yard, fragile yet resilient, and it struck me how much life had returned to this place, once empty and cold. Inside, the cabin glowed with warmth, the fire reflecting off tired but content faces. Tolla had stacked the last of the wood, her small hands steady, proud. Winona traced patterns in the frost on the windowpane, curiosity unafraid now. Nia moved with quiet certainty, preparing a simple meal, the motions of care and survival woven together seamlessly. I realized that this was more than shelter. It was home. The wind whispered outside, carrying the scent of pine and frozen earth, a reminder that the world beyond remained harsh and unyielding. But inside we had carved something rare, trust, safety, and a family forged by choice and perseverance. I knew the plains could take many things, but they could not take what we had built together. I sat by the fire, letting the warmth seep into my bones, eyes on the small forms huddled near the hearth. Peace was no longer a distant idea. It was tangible, held in laughter, in careful glances, in the quiet understanding between us. And as the snow continued to fall, soft and persistent, I felt a simple truth settle in my chest. Life was harsh, the world indifferent, but love and loyalty, those were ours to claim, ours to protect. If you've ever found someone who turns the harsh edges of the world into a place you can rest against, you'll understand why we held on. And now, tell me, where in this wild, wide world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels.